All right, we're recording. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is a thing, right? So we all have decisions to make, and we make a lot of them every day. Some of them we don't even know we've made, but they're such habit, and God made our brains just so incredible that if I had to stress out about what I wore every day, and wait, I do that already. So, um, just whatever, which way I'm going to go to work, it would just get really old. We'd be so tired by 8 o'clock, we'd go home, and that's 8 in the morning. So, anyway, God made it so that a lot of our decisions are just automatic triggers, right? We know what to do, where to do it, how to do it. Don't have to think about it too much. But life and leadership, as we think about being leaders in the church and our families, at work, wherever you happen to be a leader, it's all about making decisions and the types of decisions you make. Some of them are small, some of them are large, lots in between. So we're going to talk some more tonight about decisions that Joseph had to make as he went through. And my whole goal for this series is that what I want us to be is leaders in the church, leaders in our families. But I want us to do that because we are leaders of ourselves first. If you want people to follow you, the most important person to follow you is yourself. And so you need to be a leader worth following. And we're trying to help you do that by asking 4 different questions. Tonight's question is the conscience question. Here, wait, I'll do that. The conscience question. Joseph tests his brothers, and we have a special guest introductory speaker tonight, and that's Neal. He was kind enough to say yes when I twisted his arm. So Neal's been married for about 20 years, about 18, 20 years. So, yeah. And Mary is a saint. I don't know. I think it just goes with the name. So I don't know how that works. He's got 2 sons. They have 2 sons. Joel's 13, Clay's 11. Did I get that? Yeah. Okay. CCB is really good. It got all this great information. They're part of the Sojourners class. Neal is a deacon. He's been involved in missions for many, many, many years. Done a great job with that. He's worked with luminaries, the Haiti trips, Nicaragua trips, and probably other things that I've forgotten. So I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more, and then we'll jump into Joseph. Neal, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brent. Yeah, Brent and I have a couple of things in common. He alluded to one. We both have special Marys in our life, right. And so that's been good. And we've also both made a commitment to take our Marys to the Edmond marriage retreat every year. And so that's one of the things I wanted to tell you about. I don't know if you will remember this. I'm sure Randy will. But about 7 or 8 years ago, we had Aaron and Audrey Loney here. I don't know if you remember exactly how many years ago that was, but somewhere in that time frame. Always lots of good stuff, but Aaron's the preaching minister in Woodward, and one of the things that he talked about, actually I don't remember if it was Aaron that said it or Audrey, but it really stood out to my Mary and I, and we've kind of used that to help make decisions a lot in our family and in our marriage. And so I wanted to tell you about that one because it's been really helpful for us. But basically what they said is when you're discussing something is to basically rate how you feel about whatever the thing is, like on a scale of 1 to 10, like how important is this to you in this moment? So I'll give you kind of a made up example and then a real world example that we've used in our family. So let's say, for example, that Mary wanted to go to her parents' house on Labor Day weekend and spend the weekend there, but I wanted to stay home and, hang out with friends or have people over or whatever. And so we talk about that and we kind of are at an impasse and can't really decide what to do. And so Mary's usually good to speak up and say, well, this is like a 9 to me. What is this to you? And I might say, well, it's like a 6 to me or whatever. It's really important to her. It's fairly important to me. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, you're an idiot. Just say 10 and you get to do what you want. This isn't that hard, right? But that's kind of how that works. And it's not really the point of whoever has the highest number always gets to do what they want. It's more about it creates an opportunity to have a kind of a different kind of conversation around the issue, especially for me who maybe isn't as in touch with my feelings as it should be. It kind of puts a feeling question into a more pragmatic way to think about it. And so we use that a lot. If we're having discussions about different things, well, what is this to you? And then we have a chance to talk about it. Kind of a real world example. So this summer we wanted to do a family vacation. And as Brent said, we've got 2 boys, and they're old enough where we want to try to give them some input into those kind of things. And so Mary and I and Joel, our oldest, we all wanted to go to the mountains, to Colorado. We've been talking about doing that for a number of years, and we've not done that yet. Clay, the youngest, wanted to go to the beach, and so it was like 3-1, pretty obvious what you do, I guess, right? Except for the one who's on the short end of that stick. But as we kind of talked about it, Clay really wanted to go to the beach, and the rest of us kind of wanted to go to the mountains. It was like we didn't necessarily ask for a number, but for Clay, it would have been like a 10, and for the rest of us, we would have been like 5s or something. And so we went to the beach. We did what Clay wanted, and we all had a wonderful time. But that's been really, really helpful for us, is to kind of put that question, instead of just like, well, I want to do this, or I want to do this. Well, ask, what is it between a 1 and a 10 for you? And that's been really good. The second one, and I'll talk about this for a minute and then turn it back over to Brent, because I know he's who you want to hear from, but it's really more of a principle than it is a, maybe a practical thing that we do. But really what I try to do in family, work, whatever, is try to get input from others when it's time to make a decision. There's a really, really good book. It's about 15 years old now, called Wisdom of the Crowds. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Probably some of you have. It was written by James Surowiecki. And he used the example in here, and I think this will kind of illustrate what his main thesis is. So most of you probably remember the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire show. They had the 3 lifelines, the 50-50, phone a friend, and then ask the audience. The phone a friend was usually like, somebody they knew who was really good at trivia, maybe in an area they were weak in or whatever, but they're kind of the expert. And so somebody, I guess in this book, they studied how often the expert got the question right versus how often the audience got the question right. The expert, I think, was about 65% of the time they got the question right, and the audience was like 91%. Basically when you have more people, the wisdom of the crowd, they're going to generally make a good decision more often than not. Now, there are some caveats to that. If the group really needs to, the more diverse the group is, the better decision they're going to make. The bigger the group is, the more intelligent or better decision they're going to make. You want kind of everybody's opinion to have equal weight. If it's like the boss and 3 other people, and you kind of know, well, whatever the boss says we're going to do anyway, you don't want it to be that kind of situation. You want everybody to have equal weight, and then kind of avoid the herd mentality where everybody just agrees with the crowd. But we've had an example to kind of put this into practice here, and Ken's kind of familiar with this with the missions committee. So one of the blessings of being at a larger congregation like Edmond is there's always ideas of things to do. Other people from outside of our congregation have great ideas for us. People within Edmond have great ideas. And it's not unusual for us to have this amount of money and this amount of ideas, right? And so then we've got to try to figure out, as a missions committee, what do we do with that? How do we decide which one or which ones best fit into our plan and which ones we have to say no to? And, in that meeting, we've got a committee of a dozen or 15 or so people. And, sometimes when you're in a group, you don't really want to speak up because you're not sure if you're like the one outsider opinion, or, especially in that setting, because you may be speaking up and saying, Ken, I don't like your idea. We're not going to do that one this time. We're going to do my idea. We're going to do these other ideas. And so it's been hard at times to kind of figure out how to reconcile that and how to come to a group decision there. And so a couple of years ago, we decided to try this, and it's worked pretty well when we need to implement the strategy. But basically, we take the whole committee and we divide it up into teams of like 3 or 4 people. And we say, okay, you go over here, you go over here, you go over here. And each team is tasked to basically create a plan that you think implements our strategy the best and obviously makes all the numbers match the best. And so it sort of takes out that mode of, like, I don't want to speak up in front of the group. I'm only speaking up now in front of 2 or 3 people. And I know we got to come up with a plan that works, because we're going to have to come back and present our plan here in 30 minutes or so. And, you got to have something. So, and that's worked really well. But, the interesting thing about it, kind of back to the wisdom of the crowd, is more often than not, those plans of those separate groups, when they come back together, they're pretty much the same. Everybody kind of knew what it needed to be. It was just nobody was, willing to speak up and say that in front of the bigger group. But when they divide out and have to work on that, it kind of comes to a very similar end there. And so that's worked out really well. If it's a little bit off, we can talk about it and reconcile those few minor differences. I guess the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back over, is, and I've seen this more professionally, but I think it's true in other ways, is often when you get the group's input on the plan, whatever that plan is ends up being the best plan, if that makes sense, right? I mean, like if you're involved in creating the plan, then you're typically invested in making that plan work. And even if it's like a 90% plan, if you're 100% invested, it's probably going to be a really, really good plan. Versus if it's the best plan in the world, but there's only like 50% investment, it's probably not going to go all that well. And I've been involved in some failures where it was a great plan, but we didn't have input from everybody when we created it. So anyway, those are my 2 tips, I guess. I hope that was kind of what you wanted, Brent, but find ways to get people involved when you're making decisions, and then use this is in 10 for me, or this is a 5 for me, or whatever. So try that. And those are 2 things that have been helpful for me. So anyway, thanks again for letting me share.
All right, good job, Neal. I have a exception to your more is better rule. That would be Joseph's brothers. So I didn't get any laughs at all. That's just one back here. It was sad.
Herd mentality there.
Herd mentality. That's terrible. So anyway, good stuff. So let me start off and ask you kind of fun question. What fancy meal stands out in your life the most? Maybe I should ask if you've had a fancy meal.
I guess for me, was my prom night over in Othello's.
Okay, Othello's is good. Yeah. Hamburgers last weekend.
We had a case one time where we were out of town and we were having to entertain a couple, and it was at a restaurant that the chef that would actually come out and explain what he was going to cook for you that night. So you kind of felt like you're on a TV show kind of thing. But very nice atmosphere, very nice restaurant. But, you know, where the appetizers like that big, you're kind of going, I'd rather have quantity over quality. But it was still kind of an interesting, memorable experience.
Sure. Have the chef
I'm glad
come
I
talk to
didn't
you.
pick up the bill on it.
Yeah, no kidding. That's good. Somebody over here was.
So I was gonna say, Tara and I were on an anniversary trip in Costa Rica on the beach with the sunset, and ate a steak that was cooked on a lava rock.
A lava rock steak.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. Sure beats all my stories. I don't, my father gave me a gift certificate that he got as a tip for a $6,000 rocking chair that he made. And the reason he made it, the reason it was $6,000 is because he didn't want to make it. And the guy said, "Hey, I need you to make a chair." He says, $6,000, thinking he would say no way. He said, "No, I'll take 2." So anyway, my father gives me this gift certificate to the ranch. Anybody been to the ranch, right? It was $150. And I thought, we are going to have a good time. Maybe we get to go twice. I was wrong. Because I still had to come up with cash to get out the door. So, and it's not like we ordered a bottle of wine or something. So crazy stuff. But Mary had a really good time. So I was going to say a couple things about my Mary compared to his Mary. Before I met my Mary, I knew his Mary. This is going to get real confusing. I don't mean for it to. And I had the same blue pinstripe suit that Mary's father, Danny, had. And I was thinner than this, but she was behind me, and her dad was over there about 20 yards in the up the hill, down the hill, the old building. And she ran and she grabbed my leg because she thought I was her dad. And then when I looked down and she looked up, scared her to death. She hasn't spoken to me since. So that was a long, long, long time ago. So anyway, the way we do the number thing at our house is that Mary's answers are always 8.5, and my answers are always 2. It works out really well in our relationship. And no, I'm kidding. I really am kidding. All right, let's do this. Decision making, the conscience question. How many of you thought about your conscience being part of your decision making process? It is. And sometimes we're faced with decisions that we never intended to make, decisions about things we never thought would come our way. Something lands in your lap and you got to deal with it, and you have to make a decision. There's something we never would purposely choose to experience. Just tough decisions all the way around. So there are questions we can ask ourselves, right? And there's the, let me go back, let's be fun. There's the integrity question, right? Anybody remember what that question is? Am I being honest with myself? And then a pause. Really? Right? And then there's, of course, the second question, which is the legacy question. And that's my favorite one, is what story do you want to tell? 20 years from now, when you're trying to talk to your adult children or your grandkids and you want to tell a story, what story do you want to tell? How does that influence your decision today? And then our question today is the conscience question. Am I paying attention to the tension? Am I paying attention to the tension? So I think all of us understand that decision-making and alcohol do not mix. How many of you would say that's a true statement, right? All of us. 3 of us raised our hands. Okay. Rough crowd. Okay. So why is that? We think about alcohol and decision-making just don't mix. Why is that? Why are people who've had too much to drink, people who are intoxicated, inebriated, drunk, why are they inclined to make bad decisions? What is it between alcohol and poor decision-making that makes those two just really not click very well? Impulsive. Which part?
Just that you're more
impulsive after having drunk.
I assume I've seen it where people are more impulsive after
Imbibing.
than they are otherwise. That's why so many people try to excuse the way they act when they're drinking, because they say that's not the way I normally act.
So their inhibitions are removed, is what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. Why else? Okay, well, it's not because you had too much to drink, right? It's the chemical reactions in your brains that cause you the problem. You ever notice there's no correlation between good decision making and alcohol? Ever. Nobody has ever made a good decision drinking alcohol. And I think that physiologically there's 2 reasons. Number one is that alcohol is a stimulant. And so it kind of gets, caffeine does that for me. I have a little bit of caffeine and I can talk for hours. So anyway, it's a stimulant, right? So it increases, as Russ said, impulsiveness. It decreases inhibition. The result is decreased sensitivity to potential consequences, to cues that are there for you to see that would affect decisions that you make. The other one is that alcohol temporarily impairs the activity. I don't know any of this stuff, but I read it, so it's got to be true. The activity of the prefrontal cortex, right? It impairs your ability to just think and make decisions. And that's the part of the brain that allows you to see consequences. It allows you to connect the dots between, if I do this, then that might happen. And essentially just to think rationally. All that just goes away. In essence, that's the part of your brain that helps you make good decisions. And so when we partake of alcohol and those things go away, we're just liberated. I say we like I do that, right? So don't go there. We don't feel the things that would cause us to pause when we normally would when we're trying to make decisions. We don't feel the inappropriateness of the cues around the room. People looking at you funny and backing away because you smell bad or you're in their face, whatever. We become brave when we should be cautious. We become loud when we should be quiet. All those things happen. We're desensitized to social and cultural and relational cues. Somebody's hitting you in the elbow to shut up and you just don't get it. You just miss all that stuff. When you do that, we're just chemically impeded from rational thought. And so what's my point? My point is that inebriated people can't pay attention to the cues around them or the internal tension that they have within them. But some of the rest of us, we ignore those cues anyway, right? Without being drunk. We just refuse to pay attention to the same cues that they cannot see. We can see them, we just choose to ignore them. Intoxicated people, once they get that way, can't help themselves. But sober people often won't help themselves. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. All right. So have you ever had a red flag moment? A time when you knew something was wrong, but you weren't sure what it was. You just knew something was wrong.
guess the way I do have it sometimes, like I have a feeling some things, yeah, I don't know what, but I know some things, whether bad or good or whatever. You know, even before I made the decision, I know something's gonna happen.
Yep. The hair on the back of your head just stand up sometimes. You're just like, why is that?
Phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's your kid or something.
Yep.
Get your attention.
That does get you. Phone ring at 2 a.m. Mine doesn't do that anymore. I turn it off. But yeah, it does. That'll, and then it's a wrong number. And that's right. You hope it's a wrong number. Red flag moments. So at work, I have red flag moments. They're called phishing attacks. Phishing with a PH, right? Email phishing. And so I have a saying at work, and that's when in doubt, don't click, and always be in doubt. They just don't get the last part. And once a week or so, somebody will say, I clicked when I shouldn't have. So we fix it for them. It's great. So those are emotional decisions. And when my second son, Davis, and his wife, Courtney, they were married 1 month and they moved to China. And they lived there for a year. They were teaching English in a university in Hangzhou, China. I probably didn't say it right, but it felt good. While they were there, Mary got an email one day from her son, Davis. And my son, Davis, for those of you who know him, is an English major, and he likes to talk. And so the subject line on the email was blank. The body of the email was blank except for a link to some web page. And do you know what she did? She clicked on it. And do you know why? Because it was from Davis. Oh, this has got to be good. It's from Davis. Click. It's like, no, there's no subject. There's no body. There's no I love you. There's no nothing. And this is your English major son. There were cues and she missed them, right? And she probably would not mind if I
It's
told
always
her.
good to use your wife as personal.
Yeah. So I've never clicked when I shouldn't have ever. So that was a joke. So sometimes we train ourselves to not notice those kind of cues around us. We train ourselves not to notice the tension and then make a pause to think, why is that tension there? And from an internal sense, it's like, I'm not sure why, but something about this doesn't feel right. So Mary didn't notice that. A lot of our employees don't notice that about their email. And those are small things, you know. They just aren't. But when it happens to you, what I want to encourage you to do tonight is think about that and train yourself to pause and pay attention to the tension. It's like, oh, that's weird. What is that? Why do I feel weird about this? Why do I feel strange about what's going on? It's the kind of deal, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? You ever had anything that was sounded so good to be true and then you just fell for it? No, we probably all have. And we bought it, and I bought a trip to Hawaii like that once. And I think I was home with some kind of nasty cold or something and had lots of drugs. My real nice, kind credit card company was able to get that canceled for me. So it was not good. But anyway, don't ignore it. Don't brush it off. Ask the question, why does this bother me? Am I paying attention to the tension? So what makes pausing to assess the tension, the something that doesn't feel right, so hard to do? Why is that so hard?
Because there are times when you can't pause, you know, you're too busy to pause.
You're too busy?
Yeah, a decision.
Yep. We're too busy. Our schedules are too busy. I don't have time to think this through. I just got to decide to move on. Or somebody else's schedule is too busy and they're imposing on yours. Those people are called salesmen or salespersons. Why else are those so hard to do?
You'd like to start out with assuming the best in people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You want to assume the best?
You want it to be true.
You want it to be true. So there are several biases that probably fall in line with that thought, right? There's the, what do they call it? Confirmation bias. We want it to be true, so we only read the things that prove that it is true. Yep. Anyway, all these make it, and there are lots of others, right? All these make it hard to stop and pause and pay attention to the tension. There's another source of tension in our lives, and sometimes we don't see the problem. We don't see the things that are going on that should cause us to stop and pay attention. But your mother does, and she's going to tell you about it, right? So your mom calls you and she says, honey, that all sounds good except for the fact that it's probably illegal. Oh, I didn't think of that. And that was probably a high school when that happened. But we don't want to get too specific on things like that. Sometimes it's a friend, and they'll say something to you along the lines of, what's your wife going to say when she finds out? It's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And there's that tension. Or can you afford that? Or didn't you sign a non-compete agreement? Or something along, I thought you were on a diet. And that's the one that hurts the most. That's probably not tension related as much as it is just meddling, is what that is. So one of the things we tend to do is we tend to discount the source. We discount the tension because we don't like the source. What do they know? Their life is worse off than mine. I'm not going to listen to you. Don't do that. Somebody's telling you something and somebody has your best interest at heart and they're trying to point something out to you. Stop and pay attention to the tension. Discounting the information based on the source is another one of those confirmation bias things. They call it a genetic fallacy or something like that. It's fallacy of origins, one of those things. So pay attention to the attention regardless of the source. We want to embrace it. We don't want to excuse it. We don't want to brush it off. So this is my favorite pay attention to the attention commercial. Anybody know this commercial? 2019, the Geico commercial. Absolutely hilarious. And I can watch it every time and still laugh. So if you don't know, this is the horror movie commercial. And they run up and there's a house, haunted house. Let's go in the attic. No, let's go in the basement. Oh, let's get in the car. No, that's a bad idea. Let's go hide behind the chainsaws. Right? And so it's just what you do, right? If you're in a horror movie, you make poor decisions. It's what you do. But we're not in a horror movie. We are in Scripture. So that is anything but a horror movie. So our third question reminds us to pay attention to those signals we all receive that suggest perhaps that we aren't making good decisions. And that's a struggle for us. So we're going to look at Genesis 42, 43, and 44. I'm going to pick some verses out of there. We're going to talk about Joseph and his use of paying attention to the tension as he dealt with his brothers. So Joseph is large and in charge now, right? He's been promoted to second command of Egypt. And what is he going to do when his brothers show up because they're hungry? Will he give in to human impulses? Will he go with what would be common for that time and any time really for revenge, or will he listen to the tension that he finds in the background of the situation? So if we're leaning one way and we get the sense, I don't know about that, or you get a still small voice that you've heard about sometimes, or the red flag, maybe it's your conscience, maybe it's the spirit, maybe it's one of your friends trying to get your attention to really think about what's going on. They're providing a point of tension for you to do that. All right, so when we are leaning into options for a decision, which ones do we lean into the most? Right? You have options, you have choices. What causes you to lean one way or the other with your choices?
Here's the one that has the least negative outcomes.
That's rational. That's not the good answer.
Mine.
It is a good answer. It is a good answer. Well, sometimes it's all emotion, right? We want to go with the one that gives us the most pleasure, the one that gives us the most profit, even though that may not be what's best, the one that gives us the most praise. It's those are the kind of things we lean into. But when there's a tension, when there's that hesitation associated with our decision that we're trying to make, let's pause. Let's refuse to skip it. Let's refuse to work around it. Let's just do that. So here's a story from a life of Joseph that kind of helps explain what's going on. I want to use that. He finds himself outside all the boundaries of what he thought would be a likely experience. I don't think Scripture doesn't say, but I would be surprised if Joseph ever thought he would see his family again. That was probably not on his radar. It'd been 20 years, and He has choices to make, but he chooses to pay attention to the tension. So 20 years earlier, being sold into slavery, off he goes, as we talked about previously. Potiphar's house, ends up in jail in Potiphar's basement. And then where are we at? The baker and the cupbearer, and he's out. And now he's second in charge, and we're 2 years into the famine. And the brothers are going to show up, right? They show up in Egypt because they want to buy food for the family because they are starving. But they show up without Benjamin. And so if you're Joseph and you go, counting, there's only 10, should be 11. Wonder where the other one is. So he's got to figure this out, decide what he's going to do. And so in the story, as we think about that, where is the turning point in the story? What's going to do now that he's faced with his brothers? Let's talk about that. What are Joseph's options? His brothers show up. He recognizes them. He's got, the shaved head, the Egyptian headgear on. I don't know what he looks like, but he doesn't look like a Hebrew. So what are his options with his brothers? What's he going to do with them? We know what he does, but what could he have done?
I could have flat out told him, hey, I'm Joseph, I'm alive, but
He could do what he said he was, but he could have made a genuine accusation like what he just said. You're just here as spies, spy out the land, and they, of course, he was just trying to test them, but they didn't know that.
Yeah.
Could have made them all into slaves, probably.
Could have made them all into slaves?
Yeah, they like it.
Return the favor a little bit?
Absolutely. I think he's probably power to do that.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. The stars have aligned perfectly. The sun, moon, and stars bowed down to him. So that's good, right? The stars have aligned perfectly. And it seemed in his mind that God has given him over to him. And like so many other things that God has done for Joseph, every time something bad happens, it may take a while, but God lifts him up, puts him in a better place. And so maybe this is a God thing. Maybe God has brought them into his presence so that he can deal a little retribution. He can exact what someone said was a well-earned reward for their treatment of him. He experienced their hatred, their jealousy, their arguments about whether they wanted to kill him or turn him into a slave. They ignored his pleas. We're going to see here in a few verses about that. And on top of that, who would know if he did that? Who's going to know what he chooses to do? Or what are his other choices? Mercy? Give them some mercy. Show the same mercy that God has shown Joseph repeatedly in time after time in those horrible conditions, horrible situations. Test them to see if they've changed. And the point is, will he pay attention to the tension? All right, so we discovered that Joseph has not responded in the same way that his brothers probably would have responded to him. Instead, he finds a way to pause, and he's going to do that for 3 days. So let's read this a little bit. Now, Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Scripture is a lot of fun when prophecies come true. It's pretty awesome. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come here to see if our land is unprotected. All right, so is he going to pay attention to the tension? Verse 17, and he put them all in custody for 3 days. All right, he's going to give them an option here. On the third day, Joseph said to them, do this and you'll live, for I fear God. So he said, send one of your brothers back. And in talking, they said, we have a dad, he's alive, we got a brother. He said, send one of your brothers back, bring your youngest brother, and you'll get the other 9 I'll release. And then after 3 days, he says, here's what we're going to do. Do this, and I'll let you live for fear God. If you're honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and you may not die. This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life. but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. So Joseph is putting them to the test, right? And Reuben is the first to really kind of respond to that test. What does Reuben say? Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? This is the first time, by the way, Joseph's heard this. He doesn't know this happened, right? Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They didn't realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep because he heard, hey, somebody was on my side, right? But then came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Why Simeon? Did we talk about this last week? Okay, never mind. You already know the answer. But if you weren't here, it's because what Reuben just did, right? Reuben said, I told you not to do this. So next in line, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, right? So Simeon's it. So Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and put each man's silver back in the sack, to give them provisions for their journey. And after this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. So Joseph gives them an opportunity to prove themselves, right? So who does Joseph's decision as he tests his brothers, give them a chance to prove that they've changed? Who does that impact? He's going to say, hey, let's find out if you've changed. Let's see if you're going to come back and get Simeon. See if you'll bring Benjamin back with you. Who does that decision of theirs impact?
Simeon.
Well, it does Simeon. So can you imagine Joseph, right? He's sitting there and I don't know, it's going to be a while before the brothers come back. He says not a word to Simeon. Simeon has no clue. Probably treats him well, but
It impacts Jacob.
impacts dad. Absolutely it does. Big time impact. Yep. Because they've got they finally probably just about thought maybe dad's forgot about Joseph. Not a chance. Now I got to go back and ask for Benjamin. Oh, not good. It also, so it dawns on Joseph, right, that how he treated his brothers mattered. 3 days he had to think about that, and I think he paid attention to the tension. It also impacts God, right? And what I mean by that is if Joseph did anything else, he would, in a sense, be putting himself in God's place and trying to make the decisions that God should be making. Should Joseph take the place of God and seek his own vengeance? No, he shouldn't. How can he go against the God who's taken such good care of him in difficult times? Harming his brothers, of course, would be the wrong thing to do. And if he harms his brothers, it doesn't really guarantee any outcomes, right? We'll talk about that in just a second. So if Joseph ignores the tension, right? If he goes through and he ignores the tension, that nagging thought, that elbow in the ribs, and does the wrong thing because it will lead to a right thing, what's he doing? He's placing himself in God's place as a God over them. You wouldn't want to do that. So we think about predicting the future. One of the problems we have with decision making is we think we know the future. And so we make these decisions. Well, if I do this, it's going to make this thing happen. And that's not really true. We don't know the outcomes. We don't know the future. We think we do, but we don't. We think we can predict things, but we just have no control over those. The only one who does is who? Is God. So why would we ignore that boy, that still small voice of God? Why would we ignore the red flags or the tension? Because we think we can predict the future. That's a poor reason to do that because we know we can't. But we're tempted to do that all the time. And that's why we need to stop and pause and ask the question, is there a tension that needs my attention? All right, so what does Joseph know about his family after 20 years? The brothers have just showed up. What does he know? Maybe a better way to ask that is, what does he not know? What does he ask him? Is my father alive? He doesn't know that. What else doesn't he know?
Same thing that happened to him that happened to Benjamin.
Absolutely. I think that's really what's going on here. He wants to know, you treated me bad because I was the favorite, probably deserved some of it, but not all of it. Didn't deserve this. But have you done the same thing to Benjamin? Or have you changed? Absolutely. So what does he know about his family? Not very much. He isn't sure about his brothers. Are they the same selfish, conniving, untrustworthy family they were 20 years earlier? Have they changed? Was his father and brothers still alive? What was their situation? If they're alive, is it a good thing or a bad thing? He needed to know how to respond. He needed more information, and he wanted to do that without giving himself away. So he accuses them of being spies, and we know the story here about what's going on. Okay, so what do you think of Joseph's actions here with his brothers? He filled their bags with grain, put their silver back in it, let them go home. What do you think? Hard to do, easy to do?
Probably hard in a way, because, he didn't have no reason to give them their silver back, and then how they treated him. But he did it because they were family, I guess.
Isn't it also a test of the brothers?
Sure.
See how they handle that.
See how they handle it. I think it's a test. I also think it's kindness. I mean, he really is. He puts their money back. I mean, that's an act of kindness. And he knew they'd be back. He didn't know when. It took longer than they should have, but they did. All right. Second reunion. So we've had the first one. They finally run out of grain. And, apparently Simeon is kind of low on the let's do something for him list. And they're finally going to do that. Dad says, go get more grain. And Judah says, not without Benjamin. Right. So when Joseph came home, so they come back, right? They've got Benjamin. They've gone through all of that. And here they are at Joseph's place again. When Joseph came home, they presented him the gifts they had brought into his house. Why do they have gifts? Dad's trying to buy Simeon back. He's trying to make sure, smooth over any negative things that are going on. And they bowed down before him to the ground. Okay, there's that again. 27, he asked them how they were, and then he said, how is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living? They replied, your servant, our father, is still alive and well. They bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. I guess the author of Genesis really wanted to know about the bow down part. Verse 29. As he looked about, he saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, and asked, is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? So I was trying to remember what the age difference between Benjamin and Joseph is. So Joseph left town and when he was 17. So anyway, Benjamin's all grown up. Probably doesn't know if that's him or not. Got a beard, that kind of stuff. So, and he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out, looked for a place to weep. I don't know if I've ever had that experience. You go out and look for a place to weep because I need to go someplace private, right? He went to his private room. That's a good place, and wept there. 33. The men had been seated before him in their order of ages, right? They're at the dinner, they're at the feast table. He's going to give them a feast. And that's why I asked the first question, right? What's your fancy meal thing? Firstborn of the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. How did he know that? When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. So I think hunger brought them back, but Joseph still has a decision to make. What is he going to do? What will he do with these men who destroyed his life that he had in Canaan? They're bowing down to him, but this time things are different, right? Benjamin is with them. They have apparently passed that test. They haven't harmed his younger brother, and the father's still alive, so things are looking good for them. In fact, I think Joseph's disposition towards him is quite good. Throws him a little party. I'm not sure what to think about the 5 times more than everybody else that Benjamin got. I'm not sure what the message was he's trying to send there, but so what's he going to do next, right? Would he reveal himself to his brothers? Would they demand that he bring their father down for further proof? Maybe, maybe not. Let's see what happens. The final test. So Joseph has one more test for his brothers, and this test directly involves Benjamin. And you guys grew up hearing this story. You know what's coming next, right? We're going to hide the cup in Benjamin's sack, and we're going to see what happens. We'll see how they really treat Benjamin. So that's what's going to happen. He's set up to make him look like he's a thief, And when they're stopped and the cup is found, they return, and again they fall down on their faces. At this, Joseph lets his brothers, of course, see who he really is and gives them in their secret. Let's read through this. Now, if the boy is not with us, who's talking here? This is Judah. If the boy is not with us, when I go back to your servant, my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave with sorrow. Your servant, that's Judah, you're guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame for you, before you, my father, all my life. So then, please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. So what's going on here? Finally, one of these guys was thinking about themselves and is thinking about somebody else, right? So there's been 20 years worth of tension in Judah's life, and he is finally paying attention to the tension. Amazing, amazing story. So Reuben failed, and his thing was, if I don't bring him back, you can take my sons and kill him. Bad. I got him was rejected. Simeon and Levi had the old kill every man in the town thing. I got them rejected. So Judah is going to be the new king of the mountain among the brothers, right? So that's how we got to there. All right, so here we go, the reveal. Chapter 45. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. So we finally go through all this. He finally has the proof he needs that his brothers have changed. He says, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? He's already asked that. But he's so excited. He really wants to know. But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Why were they terrified?
Guilt.
Guilt. 20 years of it. Burns a big hole in your heart.
Worry about what will happen to them now that they know that Joseph one more with Joseph do to them as sort of revenge of what they did.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the time, people like that, they're afraid, they're terrified because of what they would do if they were in that position. But that's not Joseph, right?
They also are thinking, well, while they were growing up, he was next to the youngest, and then now he's got all the power.
He's got all the power. Absolutely. Nothing they can do about it. All right, so he was showing them mercy, and it's not what they would have done. They don't get that. Revenge and retribution, of course, would be probably their choice. That's what they would do in that position. But Joseph tells them, right, that he's not who they think he is. He's not like them. He isn't their enemy. He was put there by God to save their lives for great deliverance. So, verse 4, then Joseph says to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives from a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Wow, how powerful is that? He made me father to Pharaoh, Lord. How do you father to Pharaoh? He's second in command, but he's father. So, I don't know. Lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. So I think there's really a lesson for all of us, and that is what? Who determines the outcome? God does. It's not us. Like Joseph, we're to do the right thing and trust God to take care of the outcome. Joseph knew there was something in him when he had all the power and the opportunity to seek vengeance on his brothers that told him that it was not the right thing to do, and to do the right thing. And it's that tension that he needs to pay attention to. And he could pay him back, but of course he chose not to. He didn't allow what his brothers had done to him to be an excuse and to respond back to them in the same way. Just because they did it to him was not a reason for him to do the same thing back to them. He paid attention to the attention. You notice that God's use of God in this right here, verse 5. God sent me ahead of you. Verse 7. But God sent me ahead of you here, or sent me ahead of you. It was not in verse 8, it was not you who sent me here, but God. In verse 9, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. It's all about God. And that's part of paying attention to the tension. So when you begin to listen to the tension, when you will find out that God takes full responsibility for the life that's devoted to him. Right? You do the right thing, leave the rest to God. It's our responsibility to obey God. It's my responsibility to do the best to discern the will of God that I can. And the consequences are up to God. Just leave that to him. This means, I guess, for us on a practical level, we have to pay attention to the tension, whatever the source, whether that's your friend, your mom, your conscience, if you want to call it that. You have to ask yourself, is there a tension that needs my attention? And then pay attention to it. Take a pause, take a break, see what's going on. Let that build up to its fullest extent until it either goes away or you figure out what's going on. If there's something in you, something you can't put your finger on about an option you're considering, pause and pay attention. The tension may very, very well be from God. It may be his way of protecting you, keeping you from making a mistake. It may be his way of waving you off from a decision that you will later regret. And so we want to make good decisions and have no regrets. But let it bother you until you know why it does. All right, thoughts, comments before we close in prayer? Okay, fun lesson. Pay attention to the tension. All right, let's pray. Father, we are thankful that you send people into our lives to help us feel tension and maybe take a pause to make good decisions. Father, we are thankful that you've made us in such a way that we can pause, that we can take time to think about things, take time to address the tensions in our life, address those moments of conscience that cause us to doubt what decision we are making. Father, help us to do this in a way that's prayerful. Help us to do this in a way that gives glory and honor to you. Father, we love you. We know that you love us. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.